Hi, this is Juliet Landau from A Place Among the Undead, and you are entering the Fanbase.
Hello, and welcome to episode 230 of the Fanbase Weekly Podcast. In this episode, our special guest is comic book colorist and artist Mary Bellamy, who is an official licensed artist for My Little Pony, Marvel, DC Comics, and more. This week, we discuss the passing of Pee Wee Herman actor Paul Reubens, the connection and industry woes between comics writers and the WGA, if readers should be more patient before criticizing a comic book run, and much more. So long, Mr. Reubens. You will be missed. Now it's time to head inside the Fanbase.
7 days a week, it's the 365, it's the give you what you need at the. If you're along for the ride, you are now entering into the fan base. Comics and TV, geek news you need every day of the week. We're really down to the long boxes, the tabletops is where we do battle ready or not, kid. To the trolls and the haters, we'd rather wait and see, cause I believe in Harvey Dent, it's the nerd in me. Cause I can't help but getting geeked out at cool stuff. 7 days a week, it's the 365, it's the give you what you need at the Fanbase Weekly.
Hello, listeners, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of the Fanbase Weekly Podcast. I am Barbara Dillon, editor-in-chief of Fanbase Press, and one of your hosts for today's show. Before we introduce our panelists, I want to note that all episodes of the Fanbase Weekly Podcast this month are sponsored by the comic book series Rock-A-Girl. We're honored to have Rock-A-Girl as a sponsor and look forward to sharing details about the series with you later in today's episode. Without further ado, let's meet our panelists. As always, I am joined by co-hosts Claire Thorne. Hello, Claire.
Hello, Barbara.
And Drew Siragusa. Hello, Drew.
Hello.
And this week, we are joined by very special guest Mary Bellamy, who is an artist renowned for her captivating work on beloved projects such as My Little Pony and Adventure Time, and from companies including Marvel, DC Comics, and many more. With an impressive career spanning nearly 2 decades in the realms of licensed artwork, illustration, comics, and other entertainment media, Mary's portfolio site not only showcases her exceptional talents, but also unveils her passion for creating girl-centric properties that break free from traditional marketing norms. Mary, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, Mary, as I mentioned, you've worked a great deal on licensed properties, which can understandably bring greater attention and scrutiny to your work. Do you find that there's an increased pressure when working on licensed work as compared to your own creations?
Well, I think there's always going to be certain limitations when you work on a licensed property versus your own work. But I find it interesting challenges to create illustrations. For example, I'm working on the RPG illustrations for Renegade Games and for the cover art for the tabletop games. And balancing how do I keep these characters on model versus how do I keep them in a dynamic pose has always been an interesting conundrum. But honestly, I have a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun creating new designs. I've done several new character designs for these latest games, which has allowed me to put myself into a property that I've loved since I was 4 years old. My own properties, I can go crazy and do whatever, which is a lot more fun in the writing area. But as far as artwork's concerned, I love both of them.
Excellent. And Mary, you did mention you had some announcements actually this past weekend at Gen Con related to your work on tabletop games and RPGs. Do you want to mention that to our listeners?
Okay, yeah. So I am the artist for Renegade Game Studios, My Little Pony's Adventures in Equestria, and there's a few expansion packs for that have come out on their website, renegadegamesstudios.com. And this weekend, they're having a convention where all the kind of games and board games and tabletop games, I believe in Indianapolis. And they're featuring several of the things I've worked on, all the tabletop games. And I believe the RPG book should also be there as well. It's pretty awesome seeing your work about 20 feet tall on a banner. So nothing more cool than that.
I can only imagine. That must be very awesome. Hopefully some folks were able to take pictures for you.
Yeah, I got a few.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we talked about Gen Con previously of just a few weeks ago. You were exhibiting at Comic-Con in San Diego. Are there any other upcoming conventions that you'll be exhibiting at for the remainder of the year?
I may be a panelist at LA Comic-Con, but we're not sure. Usually San Diego Comic-Con is my big one. And then WonderCon, I do panels as well.
Excellent. And then not that that's certainly not enough for you to have been working on this year, but are there any other projects in the works that you're able to share with our listeners?
At the moment, I'm actually working on literary novels, so I can't say too much about it, but it's been a very interesting way of taking something that was started as a graphic novel and then going backward and making a literary novel out of it. It's been a fun challenge, and I've grown to love these characters for so long that it's going to be something really cool when it comes out.
Excellent. Well, please keep us posted on that. We're looking forward to it.
Will do.
Excellent. And why don't we find out what everyone is a fan of this week? Claire, we will start with you.
I am a fan of starting the continuing season of Justified, the Justified City Primeval season that has recently dropped. I don't remember if it's the whole season that's out right now or if it's dropping week to week because we're a little bit behind on it. But Justified is one of my favorite series of all time. And Timothy Oliphant and Walton Goggins and all of that show is just tremendous. And I can just easily say that this new season of it's different. It feels different in terms of setting, and it definitely feels like the characters have moved forward and, are in a different space now, but the storytelling and the acting and just everything. And Boyd Holbrook is in it, who has, consistently, I think, at least for me, like just stunned me with how wonderful he is in everything he is. He was, of course, the one of the antagonists in the movie Logan. He played the Corinthian in Netflix's Sandman series, and he just is so riveting every time he's on screen. And he's back at it again in this season, Justified City Primeval, which I love. I'm so happy. Yay.
Hey, that's excellent. Drew, what about you? What are you a fan of this week?
One of my favorite shows of all time has once again become uncanceled. So Futurama is back, and I've been enjoying that. It's been very fun so far. They did, originally they did this joke, and they set something up and they kind of just did it as a joke, and we're like, oh, 20 years later, this could come back. And they've actually addressed that now. And that came back 20 years later. So they're having a lot of fun, and I'm enjoying it.
Excellent. Mary, what about you? What are you a fan of this week?
So this week I took it upon myself to catch up on all the animated stuff on Netflix and Disney Plus that I hadn't seen as yet. So like The Ghost in Molly McGee is a super fun show. It's just very optimistic, and the way the main characters play off of each other is really fun. Haley's on it is also another kind of fun show about a girl who's got to do this whole list of things in this book, otherwise she can't save the world in the future, which is pretty fun. And Fired on Mars is an adult animated show on Max that it's kind of surreal and strange, but when you start getting into the world, you can't stop watching it, which is a lot of fun. Well, not fun for the main character. It's kind of disturbing and sad, but it's fun to watch it. And also Dragon Prince season 5 finally dropped, and I feel it's tightened up the story quite a bit, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of it.
Excellent. I will say this came as a shock to me how much I enjoyed this and was a fan of this, but I watched Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 this past weekend, and I actually enjoyed it. And it was probably my favorite film of the 3, which says a lot because I didn't like the other 2. It was a lot of fun. I guess I was just really surprised and shocked, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. It was heartfelt. I don't know if anyone else has watched it, but it was very good.
Oh, yeah, I saw it. I really liked it. The animal abuse scenes are a little brutal,
were tough.
But it was
definitely not for
really
kiddos. Good. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, goodness. Well, as a reminder to our listeners, you too can call in and let us know what you're a fan of this week. Feel free to give us a call at 818-732-1148. We look forward to hearing from you. We are going to take a brief commercial break, and after this message, we will return with our first story for this week. Hi there, this is Barbara Dillon, co-founder and editor-in-chief of Fanbase Press. Fanbase Press celebrates fandoms and creates new ones. As an Eisner Award-nominated comic book publisher and geek culture website, we produce new and distinctive comics and graphic novels on an annual basis, and our website offers daily reviews, interviews, and podcasts that span the pop culture spectrum, giving voice to the themes, ideals, and people that make geekdom so exceptional. Be sure to stop by the Fanbase.
Access granted.
And find out why we believe that stories truly matter. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and at fanbasepress.com. Welcome back to the Fanbase Weekly podcast. Our first story for this week is a mournful one, noting the loss of actor and comedian Paul Reubens at the age of 70 after a private bout with cancer. As reported by Variety, Bleeding Cool, and countless other media outlets, the actor, writer, comedian, and producer best known for his character Pee Wee Herman was beloved by fans and fellow industry members alike. Following his death, his final message was posted to his Instagram account by his estate, reading, quote, "Please accept my apology for not going public with what I've been facing the last 6 years. I have always felt a huge amount of love and respect from my friends, fans, and supporters. I have loved you all so much and enjoyed making art for you," end quote. Reubens began his career in the 1970s after joining the LA live comedy troupe The Groundlings as an improvisational comedian and stage actor. In 1980, he joined and launched The Pee Wee Herman Show, a stage production centered on a fictional character he had been developing for years. As Pee Wee became a cult figure, Reubens' show ran for 5 sold-out months, and he landed a special at HBO. He also committed to the character in his interviews and public appearances. In 1985, he teamed with Tim Burton on Pee Wee's Big Adventure, the character's feature film debut, which was a critical and commercial success. Reubens returned 3 years later for a follow-up film, Big Top Pee Wee, and the character transitioned to TV from 1986 to 1990 on CBS's weekend morning show, Pee Wee's Playhouse. Influenced by vintage kids shows like Captain Kangaroo, the artistically groundbreaking Pee Wee's Playhouse won several Emmys and featured colorful postmodernist set design and music from new wave icons like Mark Mothersbaugh, Cyndi Lauper and the Residents, along with guest stars including Lawrence Fishburne, Natasha Lyonne, and Jimmy Smits. Reubens' career was not without difficulty. In 1991, he was arrested for indecent exposure at an adult movie theater. He stepped away from his iconic role until 2010, but did receive support from fans and other celebrities in the intervening years. In 2002, after turning himself in to the Hollywood division of the LAPD, Reubens was charged with misdemeanor possession of obscene material improperly depicting a child under the age of 18 in sexual conduct. A self-proclaimed collector of erotica, Reubens disagreed with the city's declassification of pornography. His child porn charges were dropped in 2004 after he agreed to plead guilty to a lesser misdemeanor. In an interview with NBC News in 2005, Reubens said, quote, "One thing I want to make very, very clear, I don't want anyone for 1 second to think that I am titillated by images of children. It's not me. You can say lots of things about me, and you might. The public may think I'm weird. They may think I'm crazy or anything that anyone wants to think about me. That's all fine. As long as one of the things you're not thinking about me is that I'm a pedophile, because that's not true," end quote. Throughout his career, Reubens starred in a variety of other projects as well, including the superhero comedy Mystery Men and the crime drama Blow. He also appeared in Batman Returns, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The Nightmare Before Christmas, and Matilda, and his TV credits include 30 Rock, The Blacklist, and What We Do in the Shadows. There is no doubt that Reubens will be missed given the gargantuan impact that he has had not only on comedy as a whole, but on every fan who has been a fan of his work throughout the past 50 years. So for our panelists, did you have a personal connection to the character of Pee Wee Herman? And what are your thoughts and memories of Reubens' work? Mary, we'll start with you.
Oh, so I was a fan since the first movie. And everyone remembers the iconic, like, dancing on the countertop, the whole dance, and the "I know you are, but what am I?" And honestly, that's the first time I even heard of the Cabazon dinosaurs, which I was able to go visit, which now has a memorial to him, which is really sweet. He was like the first live action cartoon character that I remember, with his whole shtick and his persona. And I always watched his show on Saturday mornings. it was just like one of those characters that you just don't forget. So it was also a treat when he came back and did that Netflix movie, I think the Birthday Adventure. So it was good seeing him in live action again.
Drew, what about you? I know that we collectively watched Pee-wee's Big Adventure together last night, but what are your connections to or memories of Paul Reubens and his work?
Yeah, I've grew up watching the show and the movie. It was very fun last night showing your twins the dance routine to Tequila. They enjoyed that. I grew up watching all his stuff and enjoyed it. For me, it's one of those, he was always the protege of my favorite comedian, Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman is who actually originally developed Pee-wee's Playhouse, and then he himself had cancer and passed away and gave the go-ahead for Paul Reubens to do it. So it's, this is very much a part of my childhood. I will always enjoy. We were watching this. We were discussing this last night, how there's not, these days you don't have the like comedians or like groups that are playing the same character, but there's no continuity, like the Marx Brothers or, Laurel and Hardy or these days it's pretty much just the Muppets that do that, of like, doesn't matter. It can just, it's a fresh new story and they're basically playing the same archetype, but there's no continuity and we can just move on, and you don't have to remember 30 movies worth of backstory to just enjoy any of the Pee-wee movies. So, hopefully we'll see more comedians take that on, of like being able to just have a character and just keep putting them in different scenarios. Agreed.
Claire, I know that this may be a unique situation for you. Were you, or perhaps when did you become aware of Reubens' work?
I became, my first knowledge of Paul Reubens, sadly, was the entire controversy around his arrest. That seemed to get very much played up in conservative Christian circles, where it was easy to point to this is some kind of example of society's downfall, I guess. So I didn't, and I've never seen anything related to Pee Wee Herman in terms of just like sitting down and watching a movie or anything like that. And I'm not sure that character is one that resonates for me either, but it's certainly now for me, looking at like, his role in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie, and then the cameo that he had in I can't think of it. Yeah, thank you. I could not put together the right sequence of words for that title. He did very much seem like, one of those performers that I appreciate in their ability to just, do things that it seems obvious that they enjoy as well. If that makes sense. Like, I just got the sense that he just really liked doing these kinds of just like really creative, imaginative characters, and being in that space where you can just do delightfully crazy things. So that seems, and I'm bummed. I'm bummed because I definitely missed, my chance, I think, to really appreciate him. So I'll have to go back and watch some of the other things that I have not.
Well, for Claire's benefit and all of our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with Reubens' work, Mary and Drew, is there anything that you would recommend, particularly whether it be Pee-wee's Playhouse or specific films or TV shows that you would recommend to listeners? Mary, we'll start with you.
I would specifically say his first movie is Big Adventure. That's like the most iconic one I remember. I like all three movies, but the first one for sure. And if those who liked the first one as a kid watched the birthday one, I believe it's on Netflix. That one was a good throwback. The TV show was good, but I think it's for like a younger audience that kind of loses a little something when you get older, but definitely the movies for sure.
Drew, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. The Pee-wee's Big Adventure, I think, is the best of the movies. And I, still will enjoy the show. I'll also say he's barely in it because it was before he was famous, but he's in one scene of the Blues Brothers. I don't remember if he even has a line, but he is a waiter in there, which is, also a great movie. So.
Excellent. And then lastly, was there anything that with his passing you learned about his life that you were not already aware of that came to surprise you or that interested you? Drew, we'll start with you.
I didn't learn about the second arrest until just now, so that was a little interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, I was not aware of that one, so that's a different beast, if you will.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same. I would say the same thing.
Same.
I didn't know either.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Claire, anything for you? This is probably a very new individual that you're learning about. Anything?
Yeah,
particularly?
I do just need more education, so I'm just going to take that as something to inform myself about.
Fair enough.
I will say, Barbara, are
Yes.
you introducing Pee-wee to your daughters now? Are you seeing things in a different light, or what is that experience like?
Oh, it was bizarre, but I loved every moment of it, honestly. I likewise grew up watching Pee-wee's Big Adventure and then Pee-wee's Playhouse. I mean, I spent most weekends when I was not at school or not at home at my parents' mom and pop convenience store. And my brother and I would sit in the back with a black and white TV, and we either watched Pee-wee or we watched X-Men the Animated Series. And that was pretty much it. I think that's all that was on, or that's all that we could access with the bunny ears on top of the TV. But I absolutely loved it. And rewatching it with the girls, it was so bizarre because I really watched this film so many times, like the musical cues and just everything about it. Like every new scene, I would be like, oh my gosh, this scene is so fantastic. And like anticipating the lines and anticipating the facial reactions of the other characters and actors. It was just so fun. And the girls loved it. I mean, they seemed to really get a kick out of it. And maybe not everything, but they seemed engaged, which was really, really fun. So I loved it. I as much as Big Top Pee-wee is not anywhere near as good as Pee-wee's Big Adventure, I still remember watching it and loving it. So I'll probably at some point soon go back and watch that as well. Yeah. Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts and reactions to Reubens' passing. Listeners, please feel free to call in and let us know if you have any specific memories of Reubens' work that really have impacted or affected you. We are going to take another break, and we'll be back in a moment with our next story.
Welcome back. As we enter the fourth month of the WGA strike in Hollywood, comic writers are joining in on the picket line in a show of support for the writers and now actors' cause, in which they see a reflection of their own concerns. In an article titled "Combined WGA Comic Writers Picket Line Shows the Connection Between Industry Woes" on the popverse.com, the article quotes an interview with Charlie Stickney, the writer of Scout comic series White Ash, who explains some of the aspects of the overlap in their concerns. Quote, "I think we're incredibly lucky that writers for film and television have a union to be able to protect them. I wish the same thing was able to exist in the comic space to make sure creators are not being taken advantage of, or at least that there was someone there to help provide them with guidance. I'm really thankful that the WGA is an organization there to protect writers in this space. Hopefully one day more people in animation can be included, and maybe one day, hope and dream, we could invite in writers and artists from the comic industry." Stickney is, of course, alluding to the long, unhappy history of attempts to unionize in the comic industry. Creators in both industries experience some of the same issues, such as low wages, a lack of sufficient royalties, especially when it comes to the digital distribution of work, and a lack of safeguards against AI-generated work, specifically with regards to its potential for replacing human creators or devaluing their work. So, I'm curious, and not being in the industry myself, to hear from all of you. What is your response to the article? What and the connections between the comic industry and the ongoing strikes? What have you heard about what's the latest that you've heard about the strikes, and what do you think our listeners should be aware of? And in what ways do we or you imagine the comic industry would benefit from unions? Barbara, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost, this is important for me to mention, and we hope to do so in every single podcast that we do, but we fully stand in solidarity with the WGA as well as SAG-AFTRA and their strikes. For me, I would say the same for the comic book industry. We absolutely need to have unions, and not just for writers and illustrators and letterers and colorists, but editors and the staff who work at companies that are publishing companies or printing companies. I think that there need to be unions overall to protect workers' rights. Very recently, and this may only be known to a select group of folks in the industry or adjacent, but there was a hashtag going around Twitter called Comics Broke Me after the passing of a very young comic book artist and very talented comic book artist, Ian McGinty, which I believe we may have even talked about on the podcast. This hashtag started to really share the ugly side of the comic book industry and how it forces creators to put themselves through tremendous amounts of work for very little pay, and the damage that it does to their well-being, their mental and physical health, their emotional health, just to be able to get by as a professional career. And that is to say for very talented individuals who, should be absolutely making money that they can make a living wage on from their work. So it's very unfortunate that the industry is like this. It's not just comics. I'm fully aware of that, but given that we are steeped in the industry, I think it very much is a problem. But of course, as the article noted, and as we are well aware in this capitalistic society, it's just an ever-present problem. But yes, long story short, definitely in support of unions for the comic book industry.
Can I ask Barbara before we turn to someone else? Is in the comic book industry, is it a case of there just aren't very many people who are starting from that place where they're working the excessively long hours for very little pay, that those people are not rising up in the ranks of comic book publishers that would then understand what that effect is on people? Or is there just a gap between those, such a wide gap between the people who are making money, I guess, and the people who aren't?
So it's a multitude of problems, as with all things. But it's part of the fact that there's no money in this industry, period. Very, very few people, and I would say a handful of people in this industry, and I'll speak specifically of creators, are making any money, making enough money to live on as a comfortable wage, not just a livable wage, but a comfortable wage. It's very, very few and far between. And I'll even say that with the named creators that folks may be aware of, your Brian K. Vaughns, your Scott Snyders, et cetera, who are working on named Marvel, DC, et cetera titles. They're working on so many monthly titles at one given time that it's inhumane. Even they making the money that they do, it's crazy. But the interesting thing is, as I started with in answering your question, there is no money in comics. The way that these people make money is by the first look deals and the sale of their IPs, their properties, to other mediums, generally movies, TV, video games. That is where the money comes from. It's not comics themselves, because the price points, and Drew can speak to this much more eloquently than I can, but the price points of comics, the way that they're distributed, the retail model is so antiquated and so without the necessary capital to be able to fund these projects, to be able to pay the staff at publishing companies, to be able to pay creators. It's just not there. But I think because of that, and because of the mentality that has been built up for 75 plus years in the comic book industry, it's made to seem as though, oh, you just have to put through the hard knocks. You have to put in your time to be able to make it if you're talented. No, that's not right. And that's not fair. And that's not how it should be. If you're doing work and you're doing labor, you should be paid adequately for that work. So it's, like I said, it's a lot of different problems, but that's part of the problem.
Mary, I'm eager to hear about your experience.
So I first started in comics. I was one of those young creators that wasn't really big enough to get into like the big companies. So I started at smaller companies. And Barbara's right. There is literally no money. I was being paid $2 a page to ink comics, and it was ridiculous. I know that not everyone has the money to fund things, but it was kind of the point where I had to realize that I'm not going to make a livable wage on doing this. I would take work as it came, like anthologies, I do covers, but trying to live on comics alone, it's just not a thing. And what I found is that there's many companies who will absolutely take advantage of people not understanding contracts or negotiating or realizing that they could negotiate your contracts. People were like, oh, well, this is what they gave me, so that's what I have to sign. And people would lose rights to things. There is a very large company that did this to a bunch of young creators who still to this day are sitting on the rights of their stories. It's just so hard because there's a dream that you have that you're going to be famous. And then if, like Barbara said, if you work really hard, you'll be seen and noticed and you'll get the big deals. And it's like, I've been in the industry for like 20 years. And for me, at least I can see for myself, is that you're constantly having to prove yourself over and over and over again. And you keep starting at these entry-level jobs, which are insulting, you know. I recently had to leave one place because they were paying me next to nothing to do color assistant work. And it was just like, this just isn't worth my time. And it feels like they can just get these kids like right out of school. Hey, it's your big break. You can draw this 100-page book for like only $5,000, which they don't realize is like 8-9 months of work. And by then you're like making like what, $400 a month or something. It's like nobody can live on it. So like Barbara was saying, you have to take all these other different jobs. Like I know for me, I went into gaming, into animation, into illustration, and that's where my main source of income comes from. And the comics are kind of what I do on the side because I love them and I want to keep pushing the medium to girls' audiences because traditionally it was more targeted at boys. But absolutely, with the dawn of AI, that's a scary thing with writing where people are just putting in a prompt and this thing just spits out words from, we don't know where they come from. Maybe it's literally lifted from someone's writing that got fed in. We don't know. Same with the artwork, people kind of devaluing the time and the effort that we put into our projects, saying, oh, well, anyone could just, you know, push a couple buttons and then we don't even need people to do it. So I absolutely do think that it's time to change at least, you know, the whole system, but at least the writers and actors for television and movies should, you know, be getting the royalties from streaming sites, having stuff put against AI and taking jobs.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying, Mary. Oh goodness. Yeah. Drew, on your end in, you know, the comic book shop, what are your thoughts?
Well, I will say, to disagree slightly with both of the ladies who before, is there is money in comics, but it's not for creators and it's not where people think. It's in the reprints because all the costs are already laid out by the publisher. They've already paid the people to write and draw it and ink it, and all of the printing plates are already done. So when it comes to trade paperbacks, or now what they're doing is facsimiles. So it's a reproduction of the original comic that has the original ads and everything. That's where they make their profits, because they don't pay anyone anything. All it is the cost to just print those there. But which again, the creative people don't get any of that. Or if they do, it's very, very little. I definitely would say there needs to be unionization in the comics industry. The closest I feel like that was achieved was when all of the big artists in the 90s left Marvel and DC and created Image. It still wasn't a union, but they at least created a third company by creators who, you know, are aware of what goes into actually creating a comic. But you know, in terms of everything that the film industry is striking for right now, is the comics industry is far more susceptible to that, of the idea of AI writing and AI art. Mm-hmm. How long is it going to take for Marvel and DC to just, it's going to happen soon, where they're going to put out an AI generated comic and then they don't pay anyone. So in these days, comics are sold on shock value of, we shook everything up. We completely changed it. And then 2 months later, it's completely reversed and undone, and we have a new shocking thing. So what better way to do that than just have an AI thing just do that shocking thing, and it just can just keep coming up with shock value,
I mean, they
clickbait.
haven't been using AI already. Some of these story ideas definitely sound like they were. I want to go briefly back through each of you, Barbara, and then Mary, and then Drew. If there's one thing you could ask for if you were unionized, what would it be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, and it's so hard, and I wish that I had the best answer for you right now, Claire. I think the tough thing is that there's so much that needs to change. And like everyone has talked about, I mean, from Drew mentioning the reprints, which I agree with, it's just the entire model has to change. And that's going to scare a lot of people. It's going to disrupt a lot of things. I think that readers who are loyal readers, whether they are monthly subscription readers or whether they, read digitally or whether they like to pick up trade paperbacks, I think a lot of that would need to change as well. But I think that the main thing is the main item of import is that people need to be paid fairly and compensated fairly for the work that they're doing. And that equitable distribution is just simply not happening in any way, shape, or form. And it's an industry, which I love, just like Mary was saying, I love this industry. I make comics. I try to get as many marginalized creators' voices out to the world as possible, but I do so paying my own money to do so. And for me, it just needs to change, and people need to be paid for the labor that they're putting in.
Barbara's looking for a big bang in the comic industry. Mary, is there something on the top of your wish list that you'd go for?
I would say if you're in the animation guild and you get an offer for a job, you can literally show the people hey, this is what they're offering me. And there's someone that will give you legal advice, say, yes, they can do this, 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 and this, or no, 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 no. I think there's so many new creators that don't really necessarily understand what they're signing and how bad some of the contracts can be, very predatory. So having some kind of representative be able to look at your contract and say, wow, this is not okay. Hey, you don't get infinite rights to pay somebody $10 for the whole story and they can print it forever, just to get published. Yeah. And like Barbara was saying, I'm going to be that weird person. I don't know that I think floppy should be the only way that books are distributed. I think personally myself, when I walk into a store, I just go over to either the collected volumes or things that are already in a graphic novel. And I wonder if maybe instead of having to have floppies sell, to get trades to sell, to get omnibuses to sell, maybe one of those steps is just skipped and you just have a book. Because for me, I'm I would much rather pick up a book that has 5 issues in it than one floppy book and feel hey, I paid $5 for 30 pages when I could pay $12 for 150 pages. So maybe something like that, the pricing model would change or the publication model would change.
Yeah. Drew, it's on you. You're bringing us to a close. You're going to solve everything with the one idea you have right now.
Well, I'm going to say it's 2 because one is a bigger issue, but I would say healthcare. But I also don't think that healthcare should be tied to your job. So it's not necessarily, it's something that unions should fight for now, but they shouldn't have to. Mm-hmm. But the big one is, even if, say, the page rates are low, the residuals from adaptations should be higher. Because at the very least, even if you're just, not making enough now, but if you make when these movies are bringing in $1 billion and you're making $15 from a character you created, that should be higher. Because at least at that point, the characters, your work has proven yourself. They are now profiting off of you for the 3rd, 4th, 5th time or whatever without paying you more than, like I said, the dinky residual check. So I would say that should definitely be changed.
But you're not getting enough from the exposure of having your name in the credits? I don't understand. Anyway, well, thank you all very, very much. I, once again, am very appreciative of the education that I get. And we do, yes, of course, as Barbara has said, absolutely support and, send all of our well wishes and support to everybody who's on the picket lines. We certainly hope that they're able to come to a very fair and beneficial arrangement, because we want to keep this whole industry to keep going for everybody's sakes. So crossed fingers for a good result. We'll be back right after this.
For our final story this week, we will take a look at a comic book resources article that discusses how quickly fans judging comic book runs can be. Due to the monthly serialized nature of comic books, they are often judged before reaching the conclusion of a story. Sometimes a shocking twist may discourage readers from continuing, regardless of where it takes the narrative. There are also stories which are viewed differently years later due to things such as how they have aged, or if another creator has revisited the story and interpreted it in a different light. So, panel, what are your thoughts on dropping a series? Will you cut it short or wait until it's over? Has the era of binging content changed our tolerance for stories? And how does that affect how you approach other media, such as television? Claire, let's start with you.
Well, as I've said before, I am with Mary very much in that when I'm walking in and choosing to purchase or read a story, that I typically am doing that in the collected edition of, whatever degree. That being said, though, I mean, probably the best experience I can relate is that I dropped both the comic series and the television show for The Walking Dead at a certain point. And that was partly because of events in the story that I didn't have a creative issue with them. Or
was it the same point in both of them, or was it different points?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was basically the same point. But I think in terms of the TV show, which came later for me, it was both kind of just a fatigue with thinking, okay, this story is never really going to end in any way. Like, we're not pointing ourselves to some sort of anything that's going to give any resolution to the audience. But also I knew we were coming up on that specific event that it kind of ended things for me in the comic book. And then none of those things had anything to do with my placing judgment on like whether the story should have been that way or not. It just wasn't for me, any longer. Now, that being said, we are watching season 1 of The Walking Dead with my, almost 17-year-old son now, because he has, expressed a need for zombies in his life again. And so we're doing that. And I enjoy it. But yeah, it's such a hard question, because I want to give respect to both, to people who both have legitimate concerns about storytelling, but also recognizing that, most all of these issues are so subjective and are really come down to things not being for someone, specifically, but it might be for someone else, and that's fine. So it's difficult, but I would recommend that people, stick with things, I think, for the most part, because you can come back to something and suddenly find that you enjoy something you didn't think you were going to enjoy, et cetera, et cetera. And now I'm going to stop because I'm starting to ramble. So there we go.
Mary, what are your thoughts on this?
So yeah, sometimes there's a series that you just want to read, and then you get into it and you get to a certain point and you're kind of like, I think like our binge culture has automatically wanted us to have this instant gratification where we consume stuff so quickly because, Z show just dropped on Netflix. You got to binge 15 episodes over the weekend. And you really don't have the time to ruminate on what has happened in the show or the series or whatever. And so you're not really giving it a fair chance in that way. But like she was saying with Walking Dead, I eventually just stopped it because there was a scene that was very grotesque and over the top. And I just like, okay, I'm done.
I think they were talking about the same point.
Yeah, probably. It was just way over the top, and I'm like, okay, I gotta quit. Other times I've bought some books, and it's like I'm to the point where if I bought a graphic novel or a compilation, I'll read the whole thing, and then I'll decide, if after a certain point I don't like it, I was like, yeah, I'll just pass, because like I specifically like to read a lot of YA graphic novels or younger graphic novels because that's what I also write. But sometimes you'll get to a point in the story where like, wow, this is just not going anywhere, or it's not picking up, or wow, they changed directions and this is totally not for me at all. And I think that as long as you like give yourself a chance to read what you've purchased, then you've done your due diligence. You shouldn't have to keep reading something if you don't really feel that it clicks with you. But at the same time, the whole binge culture has basically made it like, hurry up and beat everybody to Twitter before that guy watches the final 3 minutes and spoils the whole series for you, which kind of ruins the enjoyment of like serialized TV where you had to wait for the next week and the next week and the next week. So in that way, I think give things a chance, but you don't have to stick with it if it doesn't really go with what you're feeling.
Barbara, do you have any sort of criteria for if you're going to continue something or just cut it off?
It's interesting. First, this is such a fascinating conversation for me. One, because I think we were talking about it last night, partly, but two, because I agree with everything that Claire and Mary have said thus far. I think what's interesting to me is, and certainly this is not new territory for us on the podcast because I recall talking about it before, but I think one, it depends on the medium that you're consuming. I think it depends on whether it's mainstream or independent in terms of the creators and the output. And I'll explain that in a little bit. And I think it changes when it was released. And I say that because I think way back when TV was serialized and there were 26 episode arcs, you really did have to give it, like, how many times do we say to people, just give it to season 2 and it gets better because they were finally finding their footing. The characters were, the creators were able to dig deeper rather than just setting up the framing device of the series and their characters as archetypes. And you really got to delve more into who they were and why it was interesting and have conflict. And it was great. Nowadays, very much like Mary has hit on, we are in this binge culture. And so studio, and why I clarified between mainstream publishers or studios or networks, etc., they have really got it down to a science of you're either going to love it in the first episode or not, and we're going to cancel the entire show. So I feel like at this point, if you watch the first episode of something and you're not hooked on a major service of some kind, chances are you're probably not going to like it. Now, I don't want to say that that's a definitive, but chances are. Now, that being said, when you're talking about independently created books or comic book series, etc., I feel like we're able to breathe a bit more and give it a bit more time because it's not, how do I want to say this? It's not content. It's not created in a very specific box, in a very specific mold that has to appease XYZ people and XYZ demographic and XYZ board members. It's just content that's it's art. It's made for media to be consumed by people. And so I think that's a really big difference between, again, the big budget studios versus independent creators of all mediums. So I feel like there are a lot of different criteria that you have to apply when you're consuming art and or content. And again, it depends on the medium as well. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. And it made me think just in terms of like the things that I want in this discussion, the ideal world would not be a capitalistic world in which you had to have people making decisions about, is this making the appropriate amount of money? Because when I look at what I enjoy consuming and what I binge and what I don't binge, I have a really wide library of things that I like. I still like my soap opera from childhood, right? Where the characters are 50 years old and, have been there for 50 years. And, sometimes I'm enjoying it and sometimes I'm not, I dip in and out of it. But I love the fact that it's there and it's ongoing regardless of the quality that, that it's actually made with. And then I also enjoy other shows where I'm like, yeah, that show's run was perfect. Nobody needs to touch it again. I'm only going to go back and watch those however many seasons or episodes, and I don't want any more. It shouldn't be any more. I think there's so much value in all of those different kinds of storytelling. So maintaining any of that or creating a world where you can have all of that at the same time seems almost impossible from a money-making perspective. So
yeah, I'll add on to that. Like, there were two shows that I really liked, Dead Like Me and Joan of Arcadia. And they were really good series. But what happened was the networks were like, well, we want to put more money into some new show that has more effects. And no matter how much the people wanted it, they intentionally killed it, both shows, so that you couldn't get any more. And unlike Buffy, they never continued on in a comic book form or any other format. So you're kind of left wondering, wow, this would have been really awesome, because I would have kept watching if I'd had the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely.
What about you, Drew?
For me, it's always like, I don't know, it's like you were saying, especially these days, it's written, the opening should pull you in, and if it doesn't, then maybe it's not for you. And I was a bit weirded out by this article. They kind of acted like if you missed it now, like you could never pick up the trades 5, 10, 15 years from now and read that story if it turned out to be a good one. Like, it was a weird, I don't know,
agree.
there's kind of a weird mentality that, like, if you don't read it now, you're never going to get, and it's like, no, if, like, there's times where I'm like, I'm not liking this, and then, it finishes and someone's like, oh no, it actually got together at the end, and you can go back and revisit it,
and maybe you're, in a different headspace, and then 10 years from now, you're a very different person, and it hits you just right. You never know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I also know frequently with these types of things, like, there's a lot of shows that people love that tell me I need to watch it, and I try, and I'm like, it's not for me, and they're like, oh, it gets better. And I'll try again, and it didn't fix any of the problems. For me, the show Lost broke me, where everyone kept telling me it gets better, and it doesn't.
It was getting better. That was not the trajectory. It was
no, and so that was kind of the show that broke me in terms of, if I'm not digging this, I'm not going to keep waiting for it to get better. If there's something I do like about it, then maybe I will. But like, there's certain things.
Yeah, and you can't know. You can never really know. On the flip side of that, for me, was this series, The Wire, which I tried to start 3 or 4 separate times. And the first few episodes of that show felt really impossible for me to engage with. But it really was, I think, honestly, a factor of the show needed that number of episodes, which felt hard to retain and understand to some degree, to reach a point where they could let the character development that they were investing in those episodes, and the backgrounds and the detail, like, come to a point where you suddenly click into it and you're like, oh, no, okay, I get things now. And from that moment forward, it's like, I would not have ever told them, okay, don't do that work up front in those episodes, even though they didn't necessarily feel like, traditionally audience capturing, episodes.
But let's use that situation in particular. Like, was there stuff in there that made you want to keep watching then, or were you just completely out? Because usually there's still other things that.
The first couple of times, actually, what it took for me to really, really get into the show and finally successfully watch it all the way through, and now it's one of my favorite shows of all time, and I get it. It was listening to a podcast that there's the rapper that was in the show. I can't remember his name right now. He hosted a podcast for the 20th anniversary of the series, and it was listening to them talk about the making of the show and the characters that were in the show that I finally went, okay, I've clearly I'm not getting to a point where I'm seeing these things. And it was true. I had to, and they had acknowledged that too. The first, season of the show was fairly rocky in terms of getting to the place they needed to be. It's very interesting, but.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap things up.
Hey listeners, this is Brian Dillon, co-host of the Fanbase Weekly, as well as Fanbase Press president. As you may already know, in addition to our podcast and website, Fanbase Press is also a publisher of comic books, graphic novels, and other fine media. Our next highly anticipated release is Nuclear Power, a 6-issue, creator-owned comic book series premiering in April 2021. October of 1962. The Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union is at its peak when the unthinkable happens. Nuclear war. 60 years later, the remaining 13 states rose from the ashes to form the American Union, government by authoritarian Joint Chief of Staff, and protected by a border wall to keep out nuclear radiation, and the individuals who were enhanced by it. Nuclear Power is a dark, poignant, alternate history tale that posits the lengths to which a government will go to protect or deceive its citizens. When the Joint Chiefs' dark secrets are revealed, will survivors on both sides of the wall join forces to fight for their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Or will their differences forever divide them? Nuclear Power has an all-star creative team written by Desiree Proctor and Erica Harrell of Telltale Games' The Walking Dead Michonne, and illustrated by Lynn Yoshi of DC's Gotham City Garage and Inside the Loop. Issues number 1 through 6 of Nuclear Power will be released digitally through Comixology and Hoopla starting in April 2021. The series will be collected as a printed trade paperback for an October 2021 release, and is now available for pre-order at fanbasepress.com. Pre-orders made by August 1st of 2021 will receive exclusive signed prints of the single-issue covers, as well as an issue number 1 variant cover signed by the creative team. Help support the giveaways, podcasts, and other free content we provide every day here at Fanbase Press by pre-ordering your copy of Nuclear Power. Visit fanbasepress.com today and click on the shop link to get your hands on some of the most original and thought-provoking indie comics on the market.
Mary, before we sign off for this week's episode, are there any other updates you would like to share with our listeners, and what is the best way to find you?
Right now I'm just working on faux facts and my own personal comics. The best place to find me is at my website, marybellamy.com, my store site, zorilita.com, ZORILITA.com, and pretty much anywhere on social media under @Zorilita.
Excellent. And Claire and Drew, what is the best way to find you? Claire, we'll start with you.
Probably still just going to Letterboxd and finding me. I'm Clarissa Thorne on Letterboxd. What is the most recent list of movies that I did? I think it was probably the best movie set on an island. So you can go and look at that list and tell me what your favorite is, and if you disagree with me. Or agree with me. You can also tell me if you agree with me.
Good or bad, yes.
Yes.
Drew, what about you?
My Animal Crossing dream address is DA618183429662. And my Pokemon Go trainer code is 118801678126.
Excellent. Thank you both. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Barbara J. Dillon. You can find Fanbase Press on all of the social medias. Just search for Fanbase Press. I do want to offer a few quick reminders to our listeners about Fanbase Press's content. First is that Fanbase Press's new graphic novel, 4-Color Heroes, is now available and features 2 boys from wildly different worlds who find love and self-discovery through the pages of a comic book. Featuring an essay by clinical psychologist Dr. Drea Letamendi on protecting the mental health of LGBTQIA+ youth, we hope that 4-Color Heroes serves as a necessary representation to readers that we, as LGBTQIA+ individuals, do matter, that we are valued, and that there is a caring community of support available. Readers may purchase their copy at 4colorheroes.com. If you missed San Diego Comic-Con, you can check out the audio from the Baking and Mental Health with Kim Joy panel, which is now available on the Fanbase Weekly feed. And also on the Fanbase Weekly feed is our latest Fanbase feature on season 1 of Secret Invasion. So be sure to tune in for that. But otherwise, that wraps things up for this episode of the Fanbase Weekly. A big thank you to Mary for joining us. Mary, it's always great to talk to you, and I'm so glad that we got to bump into each other at Comic-Con as well.
It's always lots of fun being on the podcast and hanging out.
Excellent. You're always welcome. And listeners, don't forget that you can also email us with your comments, questions, concerns, and all other geeky inquiries at thefanbaseweekly@gmail.com, or give us a call at 818-732-1148. In addition, we want to offer a special thanks to Adam Warrock for our podcast's theme song, as well as Fanbase press staffer Sean Foster for each week's amazing new episode photo. Thank you as well to our sponsor, Rock-A-Girl. The comic book series created by Louis Wire, illustrated by Santiago Latour, and colored by Martina Rossi is a Chicago crime drama that is ready to rock. The series follows 20-something Bonnie Rockwell, who has 2 jobs and 2 mouths to feed. Times are tough and life is tougher, but when she gets a gun, she's going to ensure poverty will never hang over her head or the heads of her loved ones again. The comic book series will soon be returning to Kickstarter to crowdfund issues 2 and 3. You can learn more and follow along for updates on Twitter at RockAGirlComic. Thanks for listening. Take care, all.
This has been part of the Fanbase Press Podcast Network.